You know, some crimes just become legends. They're so audacious, so brilliantly planned, they almost feel like fiction. Well, this is the story of one of those. It's been called the Heist of the Century, a tale of how a gang of criminals decided to steal a moving train. And for one brief shining moment, they actually pulled it off. This is the story of the Great Train Robbery. I mean, just think about that for a second. How do you actually steal a moving train? It sounds like something straight out of a movie script, right? But for a group of thieves back in 1963, this wasn't some fantasy. It was a very real, very complicated puzzle they were absolutely determined to solve. So let's set the scene. It's August 8th, 1963. Just another ordinary night on the British Railway. A Royal Mail train is making its usual trip from Glasgow to London. Inside, you've got 72 postal workers just sorting mail like they do every night, with no idea that their trip is about to get, well, violently interrupted. Then, it happens. A single red light appears up ahead. Now, for the driver, a 58-year-old guy named Jack Mills, this was more than just unusual. It was impossible. See, that specific signal at a place called Sears Crossing was never supposed to be red for the mail train. He knew instantly that something was very, very wrong. Okay, so to understand how that red light got there, we actually have to rewind a few months. This whole thing kicked off with a man named Bruce Reynolds, a pretty big name in the London criminal underworld, and a secret tip. And this is the key part. The tip came from an insider, a senior security officer working for the Royal Mail itself. So the target wasn't just any part of the train, it was one very specific carriage, the HVP, which stands for High Value Packages. You can basically think of this thing as a bank vault on wheels. It was used to move massive amounts of cash across the country. And this is why the heist happened on this exact night. The insider handed them two absolutely game-changing pieces of info. First, because of a recent bank holiday, the carriage was going to be holding 10 times the usual amount of money. And second, the regular high-security carriage with all the alarms was out of service. They were using a backup carriage instead, one with no security system at all. It was the perfect storm. Yeah, so this wasn't some spur-of-the-moment thing. It was a precise, five-step plan, almost like a military operation. Reynolds knew his own crew wasn't great with trains, so he brought in another gang that specialized in this kind of thing, the South Coast Raiders. They planned out every single detail, from rigging the signal to their escape, and even where they'd hide out afterwards. So, let's get back to the tracks. Driver Jack Mills stops for that impossible red light. And that's the cue. The plan snaps into motion. Members of the 15-man gang just emerged from the darkness along the track. The heist was officially on. And the efficiency here is just staggering. They grab the assistant driver first, then they climb into the engine. When Jack Mills puts up a fight, they hit him over the head with an iron bar. It's brutal. Then they uncouple the HPP carriage from the rest of the train and force the injured Mills to drive it about a kilometer down the tracks to a spot called Bridego Bridge, where their getaway trucks were waiting. Once they got to the bridge, they stormed the carriage, tied up the 5 postal workers inside, and got down to business. They formed this human chain, passing bag after bag of money from the train down the embankment to a waiting truck. In just 15 minutes, they moved 120 mailbags. And what was in all those bags? Over 2.5 million pounds. That's worth more than 60 million today. The sheer physical weight of all that cash was 2.5 tons. It's just an unbelievable amount of money, and they took it all without firing a single shot. Right as they were about to leave, one of the robbers turns back to the captured staff and says this: "Don't try to get up for 30 minutes, or else." Now, he thought he was buying them time, but what he really did was give the police their single biggest clue, a mistake that would bring the whole thing crashing down. So, from the bridge, the gang drives about 43 kilometers to their hideout, a rented place called Leatherslade Farmhouse. The plan was simple. Just lay low, count the money, and wait for the heat to die down. So what do you do after pulling off the crime of the century? You celebrate, of course. They divided up the money, about £150,000 for each person, and then, in this almost comical twist, they sat down to play a game of Monopoly, using some of the actual stolen money. But that celebration didn't last long. They were listening to a police radio scammer, and they heard something that sent them into a panic. Because of that 30-minute warning, the The police had figured out the robbers had to be hiding somewhere within a 50-kilometer radius of the bridge. That search area was getting smaller by the minute. So, the plan to stay for a few days, that went right out the window. It became a mad dash to get out of there. They tried to wipe the whole farmhouse clean of fingerprints, but in their hurry, they messed up. A neighbor reported all the suspicious activity. Police raided the farm, and they found it all. The empty mailbags, the truck, and yep, fingerprints all over the Monopoly set. That Monopoly board, that was the breakthrough the police needed. See, most of the gang already had criminal records, which meant their fingerprints were on file. One by one, the so-called perfect plan completely unraveled, and the robbers started getting caught. So, what happened to everyone involved? Well, 14 members of the gang were eventually caught and hit with these insane 30-year prison sentences. Jack Mills, the driver, was so traumatized by the attack that he never worked again. He passed away just 7 years later. But the insider, the guy who gave them all the tips, he was never identified. He just vanished. And the crime left its mark on the actual landscape, too. Bridgo Bridge, where the heist went down, is still known by locals today as the Robbers Bridge. It's become a piece of folklore, literally etched onto the map. And that leaves us with this one big question, right? The gang got caught. Their time with the money was incredibly short-lived. But the mastermind behind it all, that mysterious insider, he was never brought to justice. So you really have to wonder, for at least one person, was it actually the perfect crime after all?